the first thing I kind of want to touch on with this, well, the first thing I say as we are halfway through the podcast, but the next thing I want to touch on with this is like we actually have to have realistic standards. We actually have to have realistic ideals, if you will, of what is actually appropriate body fat levels to be at, because most people have a skewed understanding of this in both directions, right? Like you'll see the individual being like, oh yeah, like I'm 8% body fat, when in reality they're 16%. They just have relatively good, we'll call it good, distribution of fat, so their abs are a little bit more visible, right? And then you also have the other individuals that are like, oh, unless you're at like 5% body fat, like you're fat, right? And this is obviously goes back to that skewed standard, that skewed set point that you've set for yourself. Like if you've ever gotten down to competition levels of leanness, everything else above and beyond that looks fat to you, because you're like, oh, well, I can look like this. I remember when I had a millimeter of skin over my quads, no fat. It's like you've reset your standards, right? So we have this kind of dichotomy where the general public maybe doesn't know how lean is actually lean, right? Like you see people literally, they'll be like, oh, look at this individual. Like you think of like your classic like Irish mammy or whatever. Like they'll look at someone who's like quite clearly 30% body fat, like they look at like a rugby player or something and they'll be like, oh, he's really muscular. And you're like, this dude is literally carrying about 40 kilos of body fat. It's like well, he does obviously have muscle as well. It's like, he's actually severely overweight, and people just have such a skewed perception of what is realistic with body fat. So what is realistic with body fat, Gary? And like, where is the like lower limit with things? And then where is the kind of upper limit with things? And can you also talk a little bit about the health ramifications of, going outside of either side of that? Because that realistically is the deciding factor, because you might love the look of 3% body fat, oh, that's exactly the look I want, but in reality it's probably not a healthy place to hang out for too long. So what's realistic, Gary? Like I'm coming to you and I'm like, yeah, look, fat loss, I don't have any of these red flags, I don't have even like yellow flags, but I plain simple just don't know what's realistic. I'm looking at all these fitness models and I'm like, I'd love to look like that. Like, is that possible? Is it, I need to go on drugs? Like, what's the story?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, most people in the modern environment are unlikely to be able to sustain the levels of body fat that you're going to see in fitness magazines or fitness photo shoots, whether they be male or female. Okay, that's the vast majority of cases. The reality is that many people have different set points or set point ranges, you could say, where they find themselves settling when eating habitually. So some people will just eat habitually without doing all that much exercise, without trying to restrict or anything. And at their kind of normal diet, eating to appetite, making, grand food choices, they might, have a little bit of a muffin top, they might have a bit of cellulite, they might have 25% body fat as a male. Other people might adopt that exact same approach and have veins on their quads, veins on their abs, be super lean. It's not particularly common for people to be at that extreme level of leanness, but I do know some people, and I've had plenty of clients who struggle far more with the weight gain side of things, because their body fat settling point, so to speak, is actually just quite low. So that's going to determine effectively whether or not whether or not a given level of body fat is realistic for you. Because if you're someone who, classically you're someone who's been obese, you've always had a very high level of body fat, then for you might actually be on the higher end of the realistic range that we might expect for someone. Because I suppose when I think about this, I don't think of it as being like a particular range that everyone is going to fit into. Instead, what I would think of is, all right, where are we going to move from here? So for me, 5 to 10% of body weight loss at a time is a sound approach. So for example, if you're 100 kilos, losing between 5 to 10 kilos and then taking some sort of diet break or maintenance period, that for me is a solid approach. I think you need to break up those periods of time and then reevaluate. So the way you would do that, let's say you're 100 kilos, you lose, let's say 10 kilos in the first phase. you still feel good. You're still happy at the level of calories you're at. You feel healthier, you're energetic, etc. So you take a 4-week break, maintaining, and then you want to get into another dieting phase. This time you lose 7 kilos. You're still feeling good. Take your diet break again, and then you try it again. And this time you lose 5 kilos, but you're starting to feel your energy is a bit poor. You do have abs at this point. You're quite lean, but your energy's suffering, your appetite is way up, you're struggling to sleep. And that's even the case as you begin to maintain. That body weight just doesn't feel particularly sustainable for you. They're the types of things that you need to be paying attention to. It's what's actually happening when you get to a given level of body fat. And a lot of people try to override that through, diet hacks or over exercising and just adopting practices that they know aren't really going to be sustainable in the long run. Like if you have to diet doing 2 hours of cardio per day, let's say, and you actually have to maintain that body weight, and you're still doing the 2 hours of cardio per day, you have to ask yourself, are you going to do this forever? How are you actually feeling? How's your work performance? How's your sleep, energy levels, etc.? So that's my kind of, I guess, real world recipe for trying to figure out what the realistic range is for you, is to, if you're at a certain point where you want to lose body fat, you feel like you haven't got any of the contraindications we've mentioned previously, then you have to initially try that out, see how it goes, and then see how you feel along the way effectively. Of course, you can give rough and ready ranges. I think that somewhere between 10 and 15% body fat for males is going to be relatively achievable for a lot of people. For some, 15 to 20 might be a great improvement on where they were previously. And then for females, I suppose you're talking kind of high teens to mid 20s, maybe a little bit higher, would be roughly corresponding ranges, if I recall correctly. And just recognizing as well that, but giving body fat ranges is somewhat futile, because it's ultimately about, how you look, how you feel about how you look, and then obviously your health markers that correspond to that. So yeah, I think they're my points.
Yeah, like it realistically does come back to like how you look, feel, and perform. It's like that's what you're actually using as your metric for whether or not this is a good body fat level to be at. Because this is not like, we'll park your example there where you're just talking about, we'll call it more psychological stuff, like how you feel, right? I think that's pretty intuitive to understand that, like, some people are going to get down to a level of body fat where even if they're eating enough calories, they're maintaining, they're doing whatever, they still kind of feel a little bit crappy because they're too lean for their individual physiology, and that might be cured over time. Like I say, cured as if it's a disease, but it might be cured over time by just like spending longer at that body fat, which is the hard thing. Where it's like, sometimes this is just a case of, you need to spend a little bit longer at eating that maintenance, eating enough to get rid of all of that fatigue that has been built up to get to that point, and that could be the case. But very generally, another example which makes it a little bit clearer, I hope. Well, I'll give two examples because this then does hit all three of our health, performance, body composition stuff. So with Gary's example, it's more so just the body composition stuff where it's like, oh, you just don't feel good at this body composition level. Whereas like you could have performance decreases at a certain level of body fat and not see those, cured effectively until you get back to another level of body fat or body weight. Like, for example, you might be a runner and you might be thinking, oh, being lighter as a runner, it's going to improve my performance, right? But every time you get down to a certain level of body fat or a certain level of body weight, you just start noticing that your performance just gets shitter. Even if you're eating enough calories, even if you're doing everything right by the book, your sleep is great, your stress management is great, etc. When you get to a certain level of body fat, your performance just turns to fucking muck, and that is individual for you. It's going to be different for everyone, right? So that is another thing. And again, you'll see that as well with strength. And some of it is like, leverages and stuff, especially if it's like powerlifting. It's like you might get to a certain level of body fat and your squat just goes to fucking crap because you don't actually have, a little bit of a power gut that you used to have that was, helping you with some like, pressure on the thighs to kind of push you back up, etc. Or you might not have as much padding in the back of your kneecap or different things like that actually contribute to your performance. Now that you're a little bit leaner, you've actually lost all of that stuff, right? So that is another thing to be aware of, that your performance could decrease and it's not actually going to go back to the level that you want until you've actually regained some body fat, or until you're actually at a body composition level that is above what you visually, aesthetically, whatever you want to say, want to be at. Like I personally would love, like I actually find it relatively easy to psychologically, etc., walk around and be at that kind of 8% body fat level. It's like I don't have to push too hard to get to that level. I don't have to, I don't notice any huge decreases in any health markers, etc., etc. Right? Everything else is good, but my performance is not where I like it to be. I'm not able to like perform at the level in either like the gym or in work, or in like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm just not able to perform at the level that I want to perform at, right? So I could prioritize, if that is my priority, I could be like, all right, I'm going to prioritize being absolutely shredded, 8% body fat. But to do that, I have to take that little hit in terms of my performance elsewhere, And for you, again, it goes back to that goal setting. That might be okay for you. For me, I really enjoy the gym. I really enjoy seeing progressive overload. I really enjoy seeing the weights go up over time. I really enjoy like, tweaking things and being like, oh, let's, work on this little adaptation here, blah, blah, blah. And those adaptations just come by so fucking slowly when I am that lean, like once I dip below 89 kilos for me, it's like performance metrics are just not there, except for on my squat. My squat always gets better. Like any kind of squat patterning just gets better when I get leaner, right? And like it's been a little bit of counterintuitive, but there's a few reasons for that, which we won't get into here. But everything else, like I just don't feel I perform as good, right? So that is again something to be aware of for you. And again, it isn't exactly like, oh, here's the blueprint, right? And then the other side of things as well is like this can also happen with health metrics. Like you could be like, oh, I want to lose body fat because I want to see improvements in my health. But then you actually lose the body fat and yeah, you feel good, your performance is good, but you're actually like, get your blood work done. And all of a sudden you're like, this is actually fucking terrible, And this could be a case of like, your testosterone level is just in the gutter, or other hormone levels are just in the absolute gutter. Or it could also be something like, your like blood lipids could be just terrible when you're this lean, which is not necessarily always the case, and it's a little bit counterintuitive to what you would expect, but it does happen, right? And maybe that's not an issue, but maybe it is an issue, right? So there are things, and another one that you commonly see is like micronutrient deficiencies, and when people do diet down to like low levels of body fat levels, or low levels of body fat. So you could actually be compromising your health. And one of the things that it's always something that I was going to go back and forth in my mind, especially with like natural, like quote unquote natural bodybuilders who all take drugs, just so we're all aware, they just take legal drugs, or they skirt around like what is legal in their organization. Like for example, loads of them take yohimbine, and it's like this is an unnatural drug, if you want to say unnatural, that makes fat loss easier, but in a lot of federations it's perfectly allowed. In other natural federations it's not allowed. So it's like this just gets into one of these discussions of like what is natural. But like I would make a strong argument that natural bodybuilding is worse for your health than enhanced bodybuilding, purely because thyroid is in the gutter, like growth hormone levels are in the gutter, fucking testosterone levels are in the gutter, and like doing some sort of like therapeutic replacement would actually lead you to being healthier at those different ranges. Then we just get into this argument of like, oh, is that performance enhancing, etc., right? But that's again a discussion for another day.